Hi everyone, please ensure your camera is on. This is quite an interactive event. So when people ask questions, we would love to see you. So I can see a lot of people, some people's cameras not on. Give you some time to get ready to put it on. Great. And we'll start in like another minute or two, just waiting for a few more people. Amazing. Okay, so for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Kike Onawinde. I am the co-founder and CEO of BYP Network. We are a platform that connects Black professionals with each other in corporations. I think it's worth obviously addressing the current climate with the whole Black Lives Matter movement. Part of why BYP Network started almost 3.5 years ago was actually off the back of that movement. At the time, I had just graduated my master's in the University of Florida. I came back to the UK, started working, and there was a lack of diversity inclusion even where I was working in a tech startup. On top of the fact that, you know, the police brutality was happening. A few of my friends actually, you know, I went away for 2 years, came back, and some of my friends were still unemployed. And I think on my side, I just saw so many different patterns. And I was able to kind of connect the dots and realize that something just isn't right. So for example, you know, I grew up in East London, single parent household. I did well academically and also as an athlete too. So I used to get a lot of opportunities, but people that look like me didn't necessarily get those same opportunities. And that whole saying that you have to be 10 times better just to kind of get an opportunity as a Black person really sat with me, but it wasn't a good thing. It wasn't like, yeah, that makes sense, that's a good thing. It was more like, why? Like, why should we have to be 10 times better? So looking at the fact that companies weren't very diverse, I had a lot of internship in investment banking, you know, not many Black people on the floor. And I just felt like even from startup world right through to the most elite professions, we're just not represented. And there was a question of, you know, why is that the case? So BYP Network was kind of like the solution of connecting Black professionals around the globe. You know, there's a lot of us that are talented, that are not seen, they're not heard. And maybe if we see each other for role model visibility, we'll also know how to progress in the world of work. And at the same time, we can be a platform that helps corporations with talent. So what we've done in the last kind of 3 years, you'll hear from Mira a bit later on, is grow our network to about 40,000 members around the globe, predominantly the UK. We work in terms of events. So we had a conference last year that had about 800 Black professionals and 50 senior leaders speaking. And obviously with the whole pandemic, we've moved to online. We have blogs, we have newsletters, and we have an app as well. So we've kind of been dubbed as like a Black LinkedIn. But I think the key thing to understand about BYP Network is that it's here to change the Black narrative with a key focus of just ensuring that the community gets the support that they need. So whether that's mentorship, job opportunities, and just even that role model visibility. Something I say a lot is that as an athlete, I saw my identity as an athlete more so than anything else, because that was success for someone who's Black. It tends to be a musician or an athlete, when actually we're so much more than that. So I'll pass it on to Mira, who can say a bit more.
Yeah. Hi guys. So I'm Mira and I am the co-founder of BYP Network. So normally when I do speak about BYP Network, I tend to try to address the elephant in the room, which is I'm obviously not Black, I'm Asian, right? So as a South Asian co-founder of a Black movement, I've always actually very rightly taken the back seat when publicly speaking about the work I do. I'm like, you know, very aware that my background has meant, you know, some limitations and prejudices, but also very aware that it's not nearly the same experience of a Black person, and I've usually felt like it's not really my space to speak up. But actually, like the events that have unfolded over the last few weeks has given me kind of the confidence and more like the space to really talk about a topic that I'm really passionate about, which is allyship, and actually something that I've dedicated my entire career to, which is allyship with the Black community. So my job at BYP Network is head of partnerships. What that means is I work with our corporate partners to essentially help them, or essentially enable them to tap into our community on a talent attraction basis, so attract talent from our community, offer opportunities, help upskill, and also hold them accountable when it comes to internal promotion for Black people within their organization. So my background is, I'm born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm from an Indian origin, and I moved to this country when I was about 14 years old. My school in Nairobi was actually very white. It was very colonially hungover school. And when I moved to London, North London, it was the complete opposite. I was almost in shock. I was like, where are all the white people? And that made me really think and open up about race and class specifically, and also address a lot of anti-Blackness in our own community, which is there through colorism and all of these things that I'll go into a little bit later. But essentially, I spent the last 5 years working in the D&I space, mainly with women in tech, and was always left quite disenfranchised with a lack of conversation around ethnicity or intersectionality. It was always focused on gender, but very much so like white women. So I spent a lot of my time working in schools that were inner city London schools, and then met Kike and joined BYP Network. So I kind of want to talk to you. BYP Network is what we're really trying to do is hold companies accountable, and this is kind of the first step. So on Friday we ran an event for BAME network leaders to help move this conversation within the workplace, and now we're really speaking about if you are a hiring manager within your organization, if you're a recruitment lead, if you're a leader within your company, how can you work with us, BYP Network, or just take steps within your own organization to ensure that you are building an inclusive culture for all ethnicities, and in particular be super aware of the fact that there is a huge lack of Black representation across most senior leadership, and what we can do about that. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, BYP in a nutshell. I'm going to move on to whoever the next person is to introduce themselves.
Amazing. So each of our panelists, and Mira is one of our panelists, so each of our panelists will just kind of tell you a bit about their background and introduce themselves, and then we'll go straight into the questions. So let's start with Simone.
Hi everyone, really great to be here this evening. I'm Simone Marquis. I've spent the last 15 years in consulting and corporate roles, primarily within HR, covering diversity and inclusion, talent, leadership, culture, kind of the full suite. I guess over that 15 years, I've had a real yearning to have more impact in the world, particularly in terms of making it a more equitable world, and playing my part to help underrepresented groups. In March, I started a business called Get the Antidote, which is about being an antidote for the slow progress that is seen in the D&I space. I care really specifically about this agenda and about taking a stand for anti-racism. I come from a family that is mixed race, and there are, I have Black relatives, including my daughter. So this is a really important issue, and really glad that we're all showing up to confront it.
Great. And Gary?
Okay. Hi, yeah, my name is Gary Stewart. I'm born in Jamaica, grew up in the Bronx in New York, went to Yale College, Yale Law School, became a lawyer, eventually became a startup founder, raised some money, 4 million, sold a company, became a business school professor in Madrid, eventually went to work for a company called Telefonica, helped them to set up Wyra, which is their corporate accelerator, ran that for 3 years in Madrid, then for the last 5 years in the UK, where we helped startups to raise about $257 million, and they were valued at about $1 billion. And since about December of 2019, I've left to kind of focus on my own startup. We've raised about $1 million already, and it is focused on helping to improve diversity and entrepreneurship.
Great. So we'll hear a lot more about the entrepreneurship experience, I'm sure. And Ollie?
Hi everyone, I'm Ollie. I'm from Accenture, and I've worked in inclusion and diversity now for about 5 years. Prior to that, I was working for a big retail head office, And it was actually Accenture's inclusion and diversity policies. They were working with us as a client. It was actually that kind of drew me to working for Accenture. So there's a lot we do in this space. I'm here very much though to learn today as well. So as good as it's going to be able to speak and hopefully give you some insights, I'm really, really excited. I'm very passionate about this topic and learning from everyone on the call. So thank you for putting it together.
Amazing. So Ollie, so Accenture is one of our clients. So we've been working with them for about 18 months. And we love kind of everything that they do and how much they really put towards diversity inclusion. So it'll be really, really cool hearing from Ollie. And last but not least, Dom.
Hi, Kike. Thank you again to you and Mira for inviting me. I think you do a fantastic job. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Dom Scott. I'm the managing director of a company called Allyship, part of the Foxtons Group PLC. I've worked for Foxtons for the best part of 16 years and been the managing director for around 7 years. Set up a network called Afro Foxtons, which has been an incredible journey, connecting and empowering the Black community within the business in a way we wouldn't have imagined at the beginning. I also spend some of my time working with a social mobility charity which helps 16 to 25-year-olds acquire the skills they need to thrive within the corporate environment. And that's me.
Great. So those are all our panelists. And as you can see, all from a very range of backgrounds and industries. Before I go straight into questions, I just want to talk a bit about the event that we held on Friday. So it was called BYP Networks, How Do We Mobilize Change? And that had a different format to this event. That event was more of a discussion. So we had 4 panelists that kind of gave their answers to how do we mobilize change. And then we allowed those in the audience to kind of add their own answers. And then we came up with 5 summary points. So from that hour-and-a-half event with about 150 attendees, we came up with 5 ways that corporations can do better in terms of mobilizing change. So I just wanted to kind of briefly touch on them, and we will release them later. So the first thing was bridging the ethnicity pay gap. Everyone said this was, top priority, that government shouldn't, that companies shouldn't wait for the government to say, it's now official, you have to do it. They should just start doing it. And there needs to be an accountability element from the top down. So, get these stats, but then what next? How do we ensure that the pay gap is closed and that employees feel a lot better at work? Second was ally programs. So, I know Accenture does a great job with this, same as BT. This is just programs in general that can help the Black employees, but also non-Black employees that want to understand more about how to be a better colleague. So whether it's, executive sponsorship, reverse mentoring, safe space discussions, and even unconscious bias, anything that helps to educate the other colleagues about what it means to be Black in the workplace. Third point was leveraging internal Black and BYP networks. So, we can attest to this. When we work with corporate clients, we work mainly with HR, recruitment, and then they might pass us along to the BYP networks. That's because BYP networks never seem to have budget. They never, it's never seemed to really be priority, whereas now it does need to be priority. And the network leaders need to be compensated, whether it's by pay or by KPIs. Some people say they're not measured in terms of promotion based off the work that they do as a volunteer for the BYP network. That also needs to change, and that was highly expressed by everyone in the meeting. Fourth, something that's super important is the long-term solutions. This is not a quick fix. We know that people, we're currently protesting, we're upset. It's currently top news, but this is a long-term solution, and things need to be put in place that will have a long-term impact. The key thing does need to be Black senior leaders on leadership teams and leadership boards for that whole kind of diversity in thought, and for them to also have that impact in retention across the companies. So companies right now that don't have Black senior leaders or lack it need to really focus on how to actually get that with the pipeline and retention. And the final thing was just individual change. It was just how every individual can play their part, and not just allies, but also Black professionals, send back that ladder, refer other people into the organization, be a mentor, and even join boards. That's something a lot of people were talking about, how they join boards that are not necessarily their companies. So that was what we gathered at the end of that event. This event is more about everybody learning from the panelists about being an ally, and also asking us questions as well. So we will have a 30-minute Q&A. And we do want to say this is a safe space. It is being recorded. So if you feel like any kind of question that you might have, but you're unsure about how it might come across, you're free to kind of send a private message, or, you know, send us an email after, because we do want other people to see this. So we'd love to get started. And the first question is, what does being an ally mean to you? And I think it'll be really good to start with Mira, as a co-founder of BYP Network. You're on mute.
There we go. So this is a question that, you know, got me thinking a lot over the last few days, because I've never really thought about what it means to actually be an ally. Like, there's not been like steps I've taken and been like, oh, I'm an ally now. So I tried to put it all together into 3 points as to what I think, why now I identify myself as one. So the first step is education, and I'm a huge advocate for this for anyone. So one thing I remember doing, this was around, I would say about 2011, 2012, is really kind of like identifying, you know, everyday prejudice within myself, and unlearning those biases. So like, for example, in my culture, in my community, there's a huge issue with colorism, which means, you know, we consider light skin more attractive than dark skin, and you know, that's fed onto us for a long time. And I never really understood why, but I had those biases within me. And really, like, understanding the cultural historical concepts of that helped me, you know, unlearn what that was. And there's many other examples where I remember initially the start was like unlearning these biases that I had within me. And then obviously moving on, like educating yourself in the history of racism. So I remember picking up books like, you know, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. I know that's been mentioned 100 times. Or books like Natives, which is probably my favorite, which focuses on the UK specifically. And just like watching videos on YouTube. I remember going into like a deep rabbit hole about it. And there was this term like decolonize your mind, which became something that I really focused on and trying to, you know, in trying to learn about racism. And the truth is that really shocked me, and it shocked me into action. What that eventually did was I became someone who spoke up very actively against racism in a small scale. So for example, I'd call it out at home with my family. Initially made me a little bit of a black sheep, but now I would say, you know, they've really come around to understanding where I come from. Or I remember going to conferences and raising my hand and asking, you know, where are the speakers of color? Where are the, you know, where are the black speakers? Like, there's no representation here. How can this panel be an all-white panel? Like, I used to be very active when I used to go for conferences. I used to have very uncomfortable conversations about race at work as well. So my old job, bringing up conversations about, you know, white privilege and white fragility, and, you know, conversations that were really hard to have, but really, really uncomfortable, but I think made a lot of progress. And that was like where the reverse mentoring started with a lot of my kind of senior leadership. And then eventually I realized that this became something that I really care about deeply and dedicated my career to. Now, I don't think everyone needs to dedicate their career to this. It's something I chose to do. But I think simple steps for being an ally for anyone on this panel or on this conversation is, I'd say firstly, like understanding and reading like the history of race in Britain or around the world, and specifically kind of Black lives. And I think that would really kind of shock you into action. And then kind of speaking and having uncomfortable conversations with your friends and family and colleagues that you never thought you would be able to have. So that's what allyship is to me.
Amazing. Whoever wants to jump off that?
Yeah, I'll jump in if that's okay. So for me, I think being an ally means supporting the cause or the strategy in question. And it's about that individual using their privilege, which I'll come back to, in the most effective way. So if you imagine the cause or this particular strategy were a vehicle, the ally wouldn't be the person driving the car. They may not even be the person in the front passenger seat, but there'd be the person in the back seat, keen and willing to offer their support and help. And for me, I don't think there's actually one type of ally. I think there are many types of ally. And I was thinking about, a few categories that you can broadly put them into. For me, I think the first one is someone who's relatively junior within an organization, and maybe doesn't know that much about the topic in question, but they're keen to learn. They'll show up to your events, they'll ask really good questions. And that for me is important. They help make up some of the numbers, and I mean that in the most sincere sense. But also for me, when I'm doing my network events, yes, I want to try and work with my core demographic, but I also want to educate a wider audience as well. We're not going to tackle these issues if we operate within a vacuum. So that's the first category. The second category for me within sort of the corporate environment are the middle managers. So where you've got middle managers that are keen to endorse your ideas and turn up to your events, that's fantastic. But my sort of action point here would be set them up for success. Because if you've got people of influence turning up to your events, but they're asking really silly questions and they really don't understand the basics, I think those individuals can undermine themselves, and then they can undermine you and what you're trying to achieve. So do spend a bit of time with them so that they are, again, set up for success. And then the third category is the super senior people. It's the founders, it's the MDs, it's people in the C-suite. Having these people on board is like gold dust. It's brilliant. But my advice here would be get a budget from these people. When you get their buy-in, get their budget as well. Make sure you've got something to work with and have the autonomy to work with that budget. But also my word of advice would be don't overplay your hand with the super senior people. Have them at your launch event, maybe have them at other significant events. And I think there's a wider point there, which is every person has something to offer as an ally. I think the skill of the exercise is really understanding what that is and harnessing that in the right way, but also cultivating those individuals to be the allies you want them to be. I've got some great people working with me, but a year ago, some of them weren't so great, but the willingness was there. But together, we're in a much stronger position than we were.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think my definition of an ally, though, is a bit more radical. It's a person who has power, who's actually willing to relinquish it for social justice, right? Because I feel like if not, the thing that we get is this kind of merry-go-round of people kind of like signaling that they are our allies. But then when push comes to shove and a decision needs to be made about who's promoted or anything like that, they always support their own or themselves. So I think that we're now at a point where the allies that I want are people who are going to say, okay, I might be willing to give up some of my own privilege because I believe that the only way to kind of undo this systemic injustice is to take this action. I look at people like Alexis, I can't remember his last name, but Serena Williams' husband, who basically said, I'm willing to give up my board position because I think it's important that we start to have Black people on boards. That to me is an ally. People who march, I think that that's really wonderful as well, but that's not really going to change any sort of systemic injustice that's been built up over hundreds of years. I think at this point in our history, our collective history, the only way that we change anything is moving beyond the words, moving beyond the kind of nice marketing friendly kind of slogans, and actually saying, I'm willing to sacrifice something for you because I believe that you have been treated unjustly. And if that doesn't happen, then the system just perpetuates itself.
I'll probably come at it from more of an HR perspective. I think, we've got a big HR community on this call. So what can we actually do in HR? For me, being an ally, it's definitely not a passive role. It's an active role. It's not about wearing lanyards. It's actually about when it feels uncomfortable, when there's something to be said, stepping into that discomfort and saying the thing. Sometimes what that means is that when we're called on as HR to come with a diversity and inclusion agenda as a bolt onto someone's team meeting, we confront that conversation and remind those people that it's not an agenda item. Either diversity and inclusion is integral to their other business objectives and imperatives, or it's not. So you can't have it as a tick box. And we'll all know environments where it feels like it's strategic, or it feels like it's a tick box initiative. And there's probably quite a lot of that going on at the moment as organisations speed up to try and respond to what they're seeing. I also think there's a bit of, you know, looking ourselves in the mirror as a HR community. You can't be going around to the business wagging your finger at people saying, this is what you need to have in your teams. You need to look like this and have this representation. And could you hire more Black people, women, you know, etc. Whereas in HR, when we look at our own community, actually, we're not role modeling what that looks like. And there are very proficient Black, of all age demographics, HR professionals, but we seem to struggle to really make that change in HR, yet want to go and tell the business what they need to be doing differently. I think if we're ever to be taken seriously as HR allies, we've got to walk our own walk.
Amazing. And Ollie?
Yeah, I think for me, just everything is underpinned by integrity. There has to be integrity behind what you're doing. And you have to really kind of live this and breathe this. People can see through tokenism. They can see when something is just put together for the sake of it. So I think you really have to, you know, you have to advocate. I think you have a responsibility, you know, to work towards getting an understanding of what some of the challenges are. And, you know, the ways you can do that, you know, if you work for a company that are lucky enough to have an employee resource group, an ERG, so maybe an African Caribbean network or a Black network or a BAME network, you know, make every effort to engage with their events and really kind of work towards, you know, understanding exactly what the challenges are, and then take the time, you know, to self-reflect on how you might be able to help. One of the things when I joined Accenture 5 years ago, the first network I joined was our African Caribbean network. And I remember going to one of their events and literally just speaking to them afterwards saying, you know, how can I help? How can I get involved? They asked me to join their committee, and they did tell me up front, you know, there'd be a time commitment. But I think, you know, a real ally, that's nothing. You know, it's an absolute privilege to be part of that network and to really get a good understanding of what the challenges are, so that you're then equipped to have those conversations with leadership or advocate on people's behalves.
Great, thank you. We have a question. Grace Owners asks kind of, I guess, what's in it for the ally? Like, why should someone become an ally? You know, if someone, I guess, maybe this is for Gary, like, why should they relinquish their power?
No, it's a really good question. I mean, I think there are different ways of kind of making the argument. And at the end of the day, I think it just has to be because you think it's the right thing to do. But I mean, what I would say is that McKinsey, for example, has done lots of studies talking about the benefits of diversity for companies, right? The fact that I think gender would get you like 25% better outcomes, and race or ethnicity would get you 33% outcomes. But they also note that none of that has made any difference to the people in power, right? The teams continue to be lily white. There were articles last week talking about how Adidas and Nike and all of these folks blacking out their pages and talking about how important the Black community was. And even though they predominantly depend on Black athletes, not one person on their leadership teams were Black. Same thing with Apple. So I think at the end of the day, like what I'm thinking is that like, even when you give a kind of economic justification to people, they don't seem to really want to take it, because it is true that the majority of people are just like, well, that's cool. I don't really care if the business is going to make more money. I just want to make sure I guarantee my seat at the table. I do think that it does require at some point some sense of higher purpose, or that the Black community just develops enough political power to demand the change. And of course, that means that someone's going to lose out. But if you look at the US elections, for example, women, and now Black women, have been able to say, listen, we're the majority, we're the base of your party. If you don't make sure that a Black woman is the vice president, we're not sure that we're going to go out there and vote for you. Joe Biden all of a sudden listens a little bit more harshly. So I think it can either be, we would hope that it would be out of the goodness of people's hearts. They definitely don't take the kind of voluntary economic benefit argument. So at the end of the day, it probably does come down to political lobbying and a quid pro quo. If you want me to do something, if you want me to buy your products, if you want me to support you, then I need something in exchange. And if I don't get that thing in exchange, you're not going to get my votes, you're not going to get my money.
Great. I think allyship is so important. You know, even when starting BYP Network, it was always of the mindset that we need to work with corporations, or we need to work with people that can actually help the Black community. You know, economic empowerment does matter. And I think for a long time, you know, as Black people in this country, we know the oppression that we face, or the racism that we face, but others might not see it, right? If you're in your own bubble, you're living your own life, you don't really understand your privilege or check your privilege. And I think what made George Floyd video so powerful is that no one could deny what they saw there. They saw a police officer kneel on someone's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That just isn't right. So I think, you know, these current protests are very different. There's a lot more allyship. There's a lot more protesting that, from people that are not just Black. And I think that's fed this kind of, you know, what does allyship mean? How do we do better for the community? But I think, how do we ensure that it doesn't get lost, that it's not a current situation, we're all at home at the moment, and then before you know, everybody's back to business. And I think that's something for people to really think about. I don't think it is a, you know, what's in it for me being an ally. It's kind of like, well, if you see injustice, you should speak up. I think that's what we'd like the audience to take away from this. It's like, you know, just check your privilege and check what's going on, and be aware to it. You know, don't see yourself as, oh, I'm giving up something to help this person. What are they going to give me in return?
But sorry, I was just going to jump in there. But the reality is that sometimes someone will have to give something up, right? You know, there are a finite number of jobs, and it might mean that, you know, if you want to bring in more Black people and women, that means that, you know, fewer white guys are going to get in. It's just a reality. So it's kind of like, I believe that we do need to kind of talk about the reality. The reality is not that we can all win together. That's not the way it works. It means Black people have been losing for a very, very long time, while everyone else has been winning. To kind of fix that, some other people are going to have to sacrifice so that Black people can get up. It is a little bit like that in my point of view. And as long as we have this argument where it's like people throw us the crumbs once they kind of feel a little bit guilty, we don't really get that far, because this is not the first time that people have seen on TV a Black man being killed, right? It's just that right now, like you said, maybe with the COVID, it's kind of accentuated a little bit. As soon as they find a virus, people will forget about this. So I think the question is that politics and lobbying and using your power to kind of amplify your voice, that has to be the only way. People don't give up their own privilege voluntarily, usually.
Does anyone else want to comment?
I mean, I'll just say something really quick. I'm in like the philosophical argument that I think human beings are inherently good. I'm actually reading a book right now called Humankind, which breaks down like anthropologically that is truly the case. And I genuinely believe that if, in my personal experience, when you expose yourself to the naked reality of the world that is this injustice, so you educate yourself, I do believe people will become impassioned to become allies. And I think that's the first step.
Cool, amazing. Okay, let's move on to the next question. It is, so what is corporate allyship, and how can corporates endeavor to be this? So essentially this is called corporate allyship, from talk to action. So what does that actually mean? Let's start with Simone.
So I think it is quite literally organisations putting their money where their mouth is. You know, it's easy to say stuff, it's easy to change your social media profile, to, you know, create that buzz. And actually it's necessary to do that, because you want organisations showing that they're taking a stand. But this is about actually putting investment where it counts. I think right now, you know, there is a real momentum. This momentum is going to wane, as, you know, as you said, Gary, I think as soon as they find a vaccine, or it's in, you know, next week's news. Right now, the momentum is so high that we have to actually grab it. I think it's the time to get the buy-in to suppliers and programs that are really going to make a difference. When I say that, I guess I reflect on, you know, my most recent experience at BT, where we ruthlessly, and it felt really harsh on ourselves at times, looked at our catalogue of D&I programs and had to get real about what makes us feel good as an organisation, and what is it that's actually shifting the dial and making a difference. So I'll give you two quick examples. If you think that unconscious bias training is going to save the day, it isn't. You know, you only have to do some research with behavioural scientists. It has a place if you've got a suite of offerings. But if it's your sole focus, and we've seen the search results for unconscious bias training have gone like through the roof because people want that silver bullet, really quick solution, that's not going to help. Shift your focus somewhere where it really is going to work. The other thing I was going to say is about mentoring and sponsorship. So underrepresented groups are traditionally totally over-mentored and under-sponsored. And I'm a big mentoring advocate, right? But it has its place. And mentoring, unfortunately, relies on the other person doing stuff. Sponsorship relies on me doing something. I'm going to say I'm standing up for your career and your advancement and talk about you in talent reviews or whatever kind of rooms those are. And that's what it's going to take. I think we have to catch this momentum now, because leadership teams will get frustrated, they'll get bored, and if they can't see quick returns, thinking actually a bit more dynamically and in a more sophisticated way about what is a complex agenda, unfortunately, the people that are asking for it, which is typically HR, will lose the credibility.
I'll jump in, Kike, if that's okay. Yeah, great. So for me, I think a few things come to mind. If racism exists in society and companies are operating within that society, it's a really uphill task for that company to seemingly operate within a vacuum. And I think John Barnes, the ex-professional footballer, really summed it up when he said, we can't expect racism to stop for 90 minutes on a Saturday afternoon, which is the time typically football matches are played. Companies most certainly have a responsibility to state their intention to be part of the solution, as opposed to being part of the problem. And for me, there's a number of different things companies can do to make it tangible and credible within an organization. So for me, it's not about just putting a social media post online. Great for a day, you maybe raise some form of awareness, but what about the other days in the year? And in fact, I saw a company do this very recently, and they got called out on social media, and it really backfired. It showed how hollow their intentions were. And for me, if companies really want to make a difference, then it's got to be within the strategy and the culture of that organization. And then it leads from there. So the first step is acknowledgement. I think if you don't acknowledge you've got a problem or you've got underrepresented groups within an organization, then why would you put any effort in to resolve it? So you have to know something is broken to have the gumption to then go and fix it. For me, the second step is then the commitment. And unless it's something which is happening at board level, then it's never going to have the energy it needs throughout the business to initiate the kind of long structural change within organizations. The third point for me is about having endorsed networks. And I choose my words carefully. So having a network for me is a great way of crystallizing your intention to help an underrepresented group. And it's a great way of bringing people together, sharing ideas, sharing stories, and having some galvanized energy to sort of get things pushed through. But if that network is not endorsed, it becomes that thing those sort of strange people over there are doing, as opposed to it being the core energy within an organization. I still think mentorship is a really powerful tool. I'm not cynical about it just yet. I don't think we have enough visible Black leaders within the community. And I'm not criticizing anyone. I think I was guilty of it partially myself. I was raised to, work twice as hard, put your head down and get on with it. The problem with that is you've got your head down and you're just getting on with it. And when you look up, you realize there's a whole swath of people out there that have questions, and potentially you've got the answer to those questions. So mentorship for me is about formalizing the process of putting people together that have more questions than answers with people that have more answers than questions. But companies then need to invest the time and the energy to make that happen, because it typically doesn't happen on its own. So I've done this within my business, funnily enough, because I want more female leaders within the organization, but I don't have enough female role models to make that happen. So I've gone out into the wider industry using my connections, and I've brought these women into the business and put them in contact with the up and coming leaders we have. And it has a profound effect on not only upskilling people, empowering people, but it's also a statement of intent and determination for me that I want the position to improve. I think companies actively reviewing their recruitment and promotion best practice is really important. You know, it's not just a hygiene factor. Where possible, companies need to reduce the amount of bias that forms part of the process. If you can limit that, then you know you're moving in the right direction. I hear your point, Simone, about bias training, but to me, it certainly doesn't hurt, and it made me more self-aware of some of the biases that I have. I mean, I think I'm a very open person, but even something as simple as if someone's had a really sporty background in their past, you naturally think they're really competitive. Not necessarily. So there are so many biases, you know, that you have beyond some of the big topics that we talk about. And then the final area that I'd like to see from every company is, you know, having a D&I page on the intranet and the internet. If this is all you do, that's not good enough. But if it's what you do to highlight all the things that you're doing within the business to live your values, I think that's an incredibly powerful tool. Once again, internally, it endorses all the initiatives and lets everyone know it's a core part of your company's energy. But externally, it never ceases to amaze me the number of people that say, Dom, I wasn't considering this business, but then I stumbled across, you know, this particular page, and it made me realize that this company seems to have the right intentions. It doesn't necessarily mean I want to dedicate the next 5 years of my life to it, but it motivated me enough to turn up for the interview. And when I turned up to the interview, I saw someone like you, or I saw someone else like you, and it starts the process of pulling in these underrepresented groups in order to readdress the balance. So for me, as you know, if as a basic, on the basic level, if those 5 things are there, then I think you've got the foundation to achieve lots of other great things on top.
Amazing, great points. And on that last point, it's true, because even us at BYP, after this whole situation happened, we put out our values, you know, we put out a whole statement. And I think that just reinforced for us what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why, you know, if you want to work with us, this is what to expect. So I completely understand that point about companies putting out that page. Let us understand that it does matter to you, but it doesn't just stop there. You know, your works matter too. Let's go to Ollie.
Yeah, so I agree with all of those points, you know, from Dom and Simone. I think to add to that, you know, having a formal allies program can help. Having, you know, a complete aligned vision where everybody, I think lots of companies will have allies all over the place, and people, you know, very well intended, who might not know, you know, exactly what to do. So I think putting some rigor around that program that really kind of mobilizes your allies all together to really kind of make the impact that you want. I think as well with that, you know, if you were to have any kind of formal allies program, you can then equip the allies with the tools that they need. So whether that be training programs, whether that be any kind of mentoring, whether it's any kind of targets or things that they can measure, I think just adding some kind of rigor to that can really help kind of change the culture as well that you're operating in. And then, you know, looking externally as well, looking at, you know, putting in kind of inclusion riders to the people that you're doing business with, looking at your ecosystem, you know, really challenging this externally as well, looking at your procurement, you know, putting targets around the diversity of the suppliers that you're working with and the clients that you're working with, I think is also another really good way to demonstrate kind of corporate allyship.
Yeah, I'd like to just jump in with one final point, just and echo everything that you guys have said on the structural level. But I was having a lot of phone calls with a few friends when thinking about this question. And I have a friend, for example, who's a recruiter, and he's doing, I think he's on this call actually, and he's doing quite a lot of work in terms of promoting Black Lives Matter on Instagram, on Facebook, writing poetry around it. And he was like, but what can I do day to day? And I was like, oh, aren't you a recruiter? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, have you gone out of your, have you tried to look for underrepresented groups when passing on candidates to your clients? He's like, I haven't really thought about it. And I was like, well, every single person, every single day in their role can do something to be an ally, even if it's something quite small, like look slightly at a different place when looking for candidates if you're a recruiter. Or if you're a manager and you have a team, like how do you develop them? Are you conscious of minorities within your team and their experience. If there's someone in your team who's religious and doesn't drink, for example, are you aware that they might not be able to come to your, to socials that are very heavily focused on drinking? And further to that, if you are building a team, are you conscious of the makeup of your team? Beyond your skills, because as Dom said, you can always develop skills if people are quite hungry. So those are things I would say, like on an individual basis, within your world of work, you can be very conscious and aware of the people around you, and promote people, hire people according to, and pull minorities if you want to be an ally.
Amazing. And Gary?
Yeah, no, I was like listening to everyone, and kind of what I thought is, there was an article in the Harvard Business Review, and they said you can tell the culture of a place by who they hire, who they fire, and who they promote. I think that the only thing I care about is who gets hired, who gets fired, and who gets promoted. Everything else is a lot of blah, blah, blah to me. And I think that at the end of the day, the most important thing actually is to have diversity on the board level, because I think a lot of people don't pay attention to this, but the board is actually the group that determines the kind of strategy and everything for the entire company. This reminds me of a story when I kind of met Ursula Burns. She was kind of the first Black woman to become CEO of, Xerox is where she was. And I asked her, how did you do it? And she said, well, basically it was this. Verdon Jordan was Bill Clinton's best friend. Because of that, he got on the boards of American Express and Xerox. And when he got on the board, he said, I want to see a Black CEO. So they got Black CEOs. He had enough power to push it through. Like, I think that a lot of this bottom-up stuff is really cool, but I think that in some of these things in corporate situations, it's really a top-down approach that works the most effectively. And the very top of any organization is the board. So if you really want to kind of drive change, make sure that the board is diverse, and make sure that the person who's on the board is someone who's actually going to be a real ally for minority communities.
Amazing. I think there's quite a few questions. Simone, one question here is, what was your focus in terms of diversity efforts? Because you mentioned silver bullets, that unconscious bias isn't a silver bullet. So what should be the focus?
I truly believe it's about getting specific. So think about the problem that you're trying to solve, the question that you're trying to answer, grouping diversity and inclusion as one big topic, when of course we know that it covers such a complex range of things, is just never going to lead you to the right answers. Some specific things for us. So we, like many organizations, want to attract more Black people, more people of different ethnic minorities into the business. Something we did that was really effective was partner with BYP and raise our profile, have that direct access to that community, and keep learning about what Black young professionals really want from the workplace. But then on the other side, most organizations will partner with recruitment marketing agencies. And then when we put the brief into them, we say to them, we want you to tailor your messaging to make it more attractive to Black people, or, whatever, women, or whatever category we're choosing at that moment. I find that to be a really ineffective approach, because asking a recruitment agency to be an expert in D&I is it's a bit of a non-starter. I found that going to D&I agencies who understand employer branding and recruitment, and who have that nuanced approach, who really get different communities within the D&I whole landscape, that is a much better solution. So we partnered with an organization called the Unmistakable, who are a D&I thoroughbred agency. They focus a lot on marketing and product development and stuff, but they also really focus on employer brand. And they're able to bring back feedback that in turn, changes the DNA of the core organization. So I think things like that are much more effective. We also partnered with, behavioral scientists to get what is it that's going to shift behavior, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about people doing something different to what they do today. That is a massively nuanced field. There is never going to be a silver bullet that can, touch every person in an organization. But working with behavioral scientists, or people that are willing to do a more test and learn approach, working in a much more kind of agile mindset way, actually you can just learn so much about what messages resonate in your organization, and they'll be different to BT or anywhere else. How do people respond to requests for data, for instance? So data is always such a barrier. You know, we don't have the declaration rates, so we just move on to the next subject. So like, well, if we need to get declaration rates, so we've got a good sense of, you know, who we've got, how are we going to ask people? Because just going out and saying, give us your data, may work in some organizations, and others, you know, people may be really mistrusting of where that comes from. So you've got to actually test a number of different methods, see what it is that works for your people in your culture and environment, and go with that. Don't go and get stuff that's just off the shelf in this space. That is my, that's my one learning.
Right,
my biggest learning.
Just in the interest of time, I'll go on to the kind of the next question, but I think everyone has touched on it in some way. Kind of, you know, to give an example of when you were either an ally or when someone was an ally to you, I think, you know, the best example that I can really give is even just my career, getting my internships in investment banking. It was through networking. You know, I met, I've got so many mentors I can think of along my journey that I met at a networking event, and then they allowed me to come in for a day and sit on their desk. And that was enough to put on my CV that then enhanced the ability to actually get the full internship. And that's such a small detail, but it makes such a big impact, because I didn't have any uncles or, you know, aunties that can get me into investment banking. But by me going to that event or me speaking to that person, they got me in. And that was what allowed me to now know I need to do psychometric tests. I need to prepare, you know, 6 months in advance before the application opens. And that was direct to a young, you know, 18-year-old, to people that didn't know me or didn't have any allegiance to me. And to me, that was my first view of allyship. I didn't know that there was even this dearth of, you know, Black people aren't really getting these jobs. But that was the first example of somebody helping me. And I think most of you probably have heard of the boy that knocked on the doors in Kensington, and then, you know, suddenly he got a mentor who was like an MD or something at BlackRock, and how that completely transformed his career. He didn't go to a Russell Group University, he went to Kingston, but yet he still went to investment banking. And that was a point that I really, you know, honed on, because it's not about your, you know, your university. It is about networking. It is about the people that sponsor you and mentor you. You can go to a top university, it does help, but even if you don't, if you have the right experience, it can make a difference. So I think that's an example of allyship. Like, who can you reach out to? Like, is there a local state school? Is there, you know, people that, you know, your kids' friends that you can kind of reach out to? And I think that's my example. So let's go to Mira.
So an example I have of corporate allyship, I've never really worked in like a big corporate setting. I've normally worked in smaller companies and startups, but a job I was in a few years ago, I was a salesperson. So I was selling to clients. I was actually doing a bit of diversity stuff, funnily. And every time I'd book a meeting, I'd go with my boss, who was a white male. And even though it was my meeting and I'd booked it and I'd done the phone calls and the emailing, every time we got into the room, no one ever looked at me or asked or directed any of the questions to me. And I always remember he would always push the conversation back to me and say, nope, Mira's in charge here. She's arranged the meeting. Why don't you ask her? I'm just sitting here and I'm just observing. And he'd bring me into the conversation, and it really built my confidence and helped other people take me more seriously. Now, it's a shame that has to happen in the first place, in my opinion. But if you are seeing the case in your workplace that maybe you're getting the credit for work that someone else has done, or you're arranging a meeting and either a woman of color, whoever it is, isn't getting that attention or the credit for it, like always push the credit back and bring them into it. Is, I think, a very subtle form of allyship that I've experienced and has really helped propel my confidence.
Right. Gary?
Yeah, no, I was kind of thinking, because I think that they're kind of like two different levels of allyship, right? I think one is like personal or anecdotal, because in my life as well, I kind of feel that there have been a lot of instances where the people who've kind of opened doors for me have been, in particular, white men. But I think that the second question that we have to ask ourselves, though, is on a kind of more systemic or structural level, right? Because I do think that having conversations about one-offs, kind of like a moment of kindness or whatever thing like that, that's great, but I'm not sure that that moves the needle, because it hasn't really moved the needle in the last like 30 or 40 years. I'm reading the chats, and I actually think that at this point, it's about more than moments of kindness, which I kind of think are really cool and really useful for individual people. But as a race of people, it doesn't make any difference to us, right? I think that we need targets. I think that basically we need people to say, listen, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. And I think that, as I wrote in an article in Forbes recently, we do have those targets for women. In the US, we've had those targets for geographical distribution, stuff like that. I think it's time that we need to say, it's important enough to us as a society that we're going to actually have targets for race as well. Because if they're not targets, then what we have are these kind of personal instances of kindness, but that doesn't really change anything on a kind of systemic level. It just means that individual people will have some benefit, but as a race or as a group, we won't. So that was what I wanted to say. I kind of think that we should just distinguish between people who are nice to you in a kind of individual capacity, which I'm sure we've all had, but then the more systemic issue of how do we change the system? And if we need corporates to have a role to play there, the corporates need to start beginning to think about, they need to start to think about like how they can help to change the systemic injustice, not just the personal individual ones.
Yeah, I just come in on that because I think, you know, there is a quick win to be made in that sphere as well, Gary, which is on graduate and apprentice campaigns. There will be many organisations here who have graduate programmes and apprentice programmes. Let's face it, recruitment is going to be your only opportunity to change the diversity mix of your business. Look at your last year's grad intake, because that is what you are saying the future leadership looks like. So if you want to see change and you want to see it at scale, you've got to go for where the volume recruitment is happening. And typically it will be happening in those places. I'm not talking here about call center roles and retail roles, which of course are volume, but actually we're overpopulated in those more low-level roles with people that are of different ethnicities. I'm talking about graduates that get a lot of leadership development focus, that really get that exposure and more fast track to leadership positions. Take a look at what you got last year. Take a look at what your plans are. If you've chosen to put things on hold this year because it's difficult right now, then what are you going to do for next year that opens up your talent pool to a wider ethnic market?
Yep, Dom.
Okay, I've got an answer here, which is probably more specific than the other answers thus far. I think one of the challenges for the Black community within the corporate space is the attitude companies have towards the way that we choose to wear our hair and what's deemed as being smart and professional. And trust me, I understand I shouldn't be talking about hair. I don't have any, but hopefully you'll hear me out. So one of the events we did was at a Black hair salon in West London with a lady called Charlotte Mensah, who's one of the best hairdressers in the UK. She's actually in the Vogue Hall of Fame. And for me, I thought it was, you know, a really powerful message that essentially the company is paid for a group of people to go down to that salon and do a workshop based on understanding Black hair and getting some tips in order to sort of put together really quick styles that are professional. But the allyship bit, which really impacted me, was we had a white director sort of join us. I think this was the first time he has ever been in a women's hair salon, and he certainly had never been in a Black women's hair salon in his life. And to see him there braiding people's hair and you know, he even went home with a tub of cocoa butter and Afro Sheen, because we gave people takeaway bags. You know, that for me was you know, allyship on the ground. And it was a really strong message to the attendees and the rest of the company that we accept you for who you are. And it's incredible we even have to say that or try and reinforce those messages. But nevertheless, we had to, and it was done incredibly well and supported very well.
Great. Ollie?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it from a kind of programmatic approach. So really quick example, you know, at Accenture, we have a mental health allies program. And to become a mental health ally, you have to undertake a 3-hour classroom-based training session. And that training session kind of really takes you from awareness to advocacy. So it's usually kind of hosted in quite intimate groups of about 20, 25 people. And you touch on all sorts of, topics that really kind of take you out of your comfort zone. And the reason that we kind of put that together was to give people, the skills and equip them with what they need to be able to signpost help to anyone that needs it. So that is quite a good example of a program that doesn't only benefit people who suffer from poor mental health, but it's totally kind of changed our workplace culture as well and has made it more open in general. So not only are our leadership kind of bought into it and are attending these sessions and are actively taking part in very uncomfortable discussions, but it's just making everybody's awareness heightened. And it's honestly, it's kind of transformed our culture. Gone are the days now where people, have to fake food poisoning or, take time off and cover up, for it being reasons around poor mental health or stress or anxiety. So I think an Allies program, can really help change the culture as well as benefit the individual as well.
Great. Mira, did you go or did I miss? Did you? Okay, cool. I think let me let some people ask some questions. So if I call out your name, please do have your camera on. If it's off guard, don't worry about it. Can we get HRSJXA? You have a question.
I think I asked several questions. Hi, I'm John. I work for HarperCollins. I was interested to find out the panel's view on positive action, particularly in regards to recruitment and probably also development, because we talked about how talent moves through the organisation, and obviously in terms of getting to the boardroom, how do we change the makeup of our boardrooms? So positive action, really, what's the panel's view on it? Is it a good thing to consider?
Great. Who'd like to answer that question?
I'll jump in on that question. I'm not totally familiar with the term positive action. Is that essentially where you do something in order to sort of rectify the issue very quickly? Is that what you mean by
affirmative action? Is it kind of like what they say in America?
No, it's legal in the UK to do to run things like BAME traineeships, or where you're underrepresented by talent in an organisation, you can encourage representation for applications for jobs in your organisation, but also you can do similar things with development. But I just wanted to get the view of the panel on how that plays out in an organisation with other talent, as well as BAME talent, actually, in the organisation.
Yeah, I mean, my sort of 2 cents on it, I think it needs to be done. I think if steps aren't being taken to readdress the balance, and disproportionately so, then we just won't catch up. And I think there's a number of different vehicles in play that help people get to positions of power. One is nepotism, another one is cronyism. As and when a vehicle is proposed, which helps people of colour, it's always looked at negatively. To me, if someone says it's unfair, I say, well, it's actually making it equally unfair. And you can get somebody into a position, but in my experience, dead wood always falls off. So absolutely, let's help people to get there. But if they're fundamentally not good enough to be there, they won't last. And I think there's a really good legacy of people getting into positions and then surprising everyone because they have the skill. They don't necessarily tick all the right boxes, but they realize there's more to success than people ticking certain boxes. It's about character. It's about the experiences that they've been through, and ultimately how they perform as and when push comes to shove.
Great. Can we get Hannah Awanuga? You have a question? Hannah?
Hi everyone. I didn't actually have a question, but I will ask a question. I think one of the things for me around allyship is the buy-in, and what we're talking about here is, at board level having representation. But I'll just ask the question around how do we get the buy-in? And we talked about, I think it was Gary that mentioned that using figures doesn't really cut it. And yes, absolutely, Mira mentioned about just being a good person. But I work, in a big, large organisation, and being a nice person is great, and the figures don't really sway it. So it'll just be good to kind of hear, how do you get that senior buy-in? And right now the buy-in is there because of Black Lives Matter and everything that happened with George Floyd. But for that longevity, what steps can you do to kind of make sure that that sticks?
Anyone like to answer that?
Well, I think I'm just going to say what happens in the US. Like in the US, the only way that Black people ever got civil rights was when there was a shame factor to it, kind of like what we're seeing now, when all of a sudden, for the first time, people could see Black people having dogs sicked on them. And so there was a kind of guilt element, but then followed up with kind of like changes or requests for specific changes, whether it changes in the law or changes in boycotting people who were discriminating against you. So I do think that it's about keeping the pressure on. I don't think that anyone is going to give you anything. I think it's about kind of making sure that we're prepared for a long-term fight with the need to have very specific requests. So when I've been able to kind of meet with like senior politicians, like what they basically said is, don't come to me with like your tears. Well, it was a Black politician. Don't come with tears. Come with 1 to 2 asks that are actionable. And then I can maybe see if I can push them through. But if all we do is have like a pity party and cry and, that kind of stuff, people just kind of zone out. Like you have to basically have some amount of leverage over them, and then you need to have very specific requests that they think they can actually deliver.
Great, amazing.
I think now, just one more thing, I think now is the perfect time to take advantage. In my experience, like I've never had more corporate engagement from BYP than in the last couple of weeks. And I know a lot of it is, and we're being very careful to make sure it's not lip service, but at the same time, companies are listening now. So if there's any time right now that you guys want to, push this agenda, like I would say take advantage, reach out to HR, reach out to your board, reach out to C-level, and make a point because they're listening.
Yeah, I mean, just like, again, our event on Friday, the 5th point was be bold, be brave, like say what's on your mind, see if your company can make those changes, and understand that it's not just about you, it's about those that are going to come after you, it's about the, the organization. So definitely be bold. Can we get Gop's iPhone?
Right, sorry, hi, Richard Goppy. Yeah, thanks for allowing me to ask a question. Yes, so I'm in financial services. I've been in financial services 40 years this month. And one of the things I think, I wanted probably someone to answer the question, it might be Dom, because he is in financial services, but how do you feel the financial services sector are actually dealing with racism and their views on diversity and inclusion?
Where I'm sitting, I haven't seen anything.
Yeah.
I mean, last week,
Oh, it's gone.
Frozen.
It's frozen on all of us.
Dom's frozen. Yeah.
am I back?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, it's raining cats and dogs where I am, so I don't know if that's affecting. Yeah, the silence was deafening within the mortgage sector, and for me, it just highlighted that either people don't care, or maybe they do, but they're too scared to approach the topic because they might be regarded as virtue signaling. Or so I purposefully sort of wrote an article which tackled all the key points head on. And the purpose of producing the article was to give people the conversational tools to engage with each other constructively. And I feel it sort of had that effect. But as we've discussed already, it opens a window of opportunity. And if that window of opportunity disappears, then you're back to square one. The other point that I would add is, don't underestimate the degree to...
Tell me frozen again.
Okay, Dom's frozen.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think anyone else is in finance, but I mean, even
no,
I guess...
No worries.
I think
even if it isn't someone in finance, it's a way of actually getting that message across. Because, funny enough, I mean, I'm reporting into RMD, and I've been challenging people in the last week or so, and myself and the MD are going to have probably put a podcast together and him asking me a few questions. So I'm just intrigued, probably from a financial services point of view, but also just in general, how people see that some of these other companies are actually dealing with it. But yeah.
I can talk about the venture capital space.
Right, yeah, that works.
Yeah. And what they're doing in venture capital is that some big companies are actually creating funds specifically for underrepresented minorities. So SoftBank has kind of created a fund for about like $100 million that will only invest in underrepresented founders of color. So far, they've been the kind of biggest and the boldest, but now you're starting to see other funds say the same thing, that they're going to kind of create dedicated funds to address the issue of underrepresented founders. And then a bunch of them are also trying to figure out how to work their scouting program. So usually they say that the argument's really one of pipeline, that they can't kind of access Black talent. So now they're trying to figure out how they can create directories of different organizations that have ties to the Black community, and then use these organizations as a way to recruit startups or talent or whatever the case may be.
Right, lovely. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. We will drop Dom's article in the chat in a second. Can we get Sarah Coombs?
Hi everyone, it's Sarah. Thank you for this session. It's been really informative. Sorry, can you hear me okay, firstly?
Yeah.
Fab. So I guess I just wanted to ask a question with regards to talent attraction. As a company, we do a lot in terms of graduate recruitment and early careers, in terms of partnerships, events, that kind of outreach. And we are doing more in terms of things like giving our Black networks or African and Caribbean networks an external platform in terms of social media, editorials, some events that we're doing. But I just wondered if there's anything that anybody has seen which has been very effective from a kind of Black talent attraction perspective when focusing more at those more kind of mid and senior career levels, because a lot of initiatives and partnerships we've seen tend to be, other than BYP, tend to be more focused at that kind of early career spectrum.
So just to clarify, BYP very much focuses on the mid to senior level. So we do have a representation for early careers as well, but it's a spectrum, and actually about 40% of our network is 3 to 5 years experience plus. We think that's really important because we really want to focus on leadership and actually mid-management and a representation there. But I mean, from my experience working with companies over the last few years, I think it's beyond just posting on a job board or attending an event. I think there's a systemic change that needs to happen within the organization from top down. So when you are engaging with companies like BYP, for example, we actually want to start, speaking to senior leadership, speaking to recruitment teams, speaking to, really relevant stakeholders within the organization to help inform them as to why this is quite important, and essentially run like internal workshops. And then when you have that buy-in from the entire organization, I think when you're engaging with talent, it's more than just posting a roles, it's actually upskilling as well. So what skills do you have within your organization, and what Black leaders do you have within your organization that you can showcase externally to show that, we are inclusive, we're actually looking to hire, and be very, you need to be very focused on engaging with minority groups in that way. So you need to engage beyond just posting or beyond just events, but it's actually like the engagement piece, which is generally to do with like upskilling and digital content, in my opinion.
I think Simone would be good to jump on this.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's about bringing maximum authenticity, whatever level you're trying to recruit at. So if all your website and marketing and talent attraction stuff is full of people of different ethnicities, but actually that's not the experience somebody's going to have when they come to interview or assessment centres or actually start in your business, don't try and fool people. What we found worked was inviting people from the demographic, using specific networks that are able to tap into that market, to drinks evenings. So we could actually honestly say, we are not where we want to be. We want to be better. These are our diversity ambitions. This is the kind of career that you can expect here. but it's actually about being totally authentic and honest about your current situation, and then the glide path to get where you want to, not fooling people.
And Ollie, can you jump in as well, please?
Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, when you're putting together any kind of talent attraction strategy, it's, I think, co-creating it as well, you know, with various people in your organization. So it doesn't just sit within recruitment or within marketing, but perhaps you're bringing in people, you know, from your BAME, your BME, your African Caribbean networks to co-create that strategy as well, and really ideate around the different ways that you can recruit. Think about personas and who you're trying to attract in the organization. And I think it's hosting those kind of co-creation workshops that really give you some kind of good tangible ideas and might just challenge your way of thinking to get that diversity into the organization.
Great. Can we get Samira?
Hi, thanks, Kike. Hi, I'm Samira. I'm a lawyer. And it was just to go back to a point that Gary and Dom made earlier, where you know, you drew a distinction between individual acts of kindness and really pushing for systemic change. And Dom, you spoke to the fact that there are 3 levels of seniority that can push for change. As someone who is moving from a junior to a mid-level role, what is the one piece of advice you would give someone like me, who is in a very large organisation and would like to push for change?
The advice I would give you is, don't underestimate the degree to which people really don't understand the challenges. And I don't say that to be cynical, but I say that because until you recognize the challenge for what it is, you won't be able to engage with it in the right way. So most people think racism is someone being a bit politically incorrect, you know, saying the wrong thing. And it can be that, but it's not really what's being discussed here. Racism is a systemic power structure that's designed to devalue the life, the liberty, and the economic potential of certain groups based on their color. And that permeates policy, it permeates institutions, and has a profound effect on the Black community in terms of education policy, in terms of policing, in terms of job opportunities. And you know, I can go through all the stats to sort of back that up. Everyone knows them. I've had some heart-to-hearts with individuals of all levels, people that I've known for 5, 6, 10 years. And we've blown each other's minds in terms of some of the things we've discovered. There are people that are now sort of saying to themselves, how have I lived for 40 years and not known about the British Nationality Act? Or how have I not known about Operation Legacy? How have I not known about, you know, some things that are sort of fairly obvious to me in my community? And in a sense, you know, we talk about disturbing a marketplace in tech, don't we, or within business. People are disturbing themselves. You know, it's making them sort of challenge their own education, the relationship with friends, the relationship with parents. And we can't expect people to get their heads around that in 5 minutes. So for me, my bit of advice is have these deep and meaningful conversations. And when I do them, I try and create a space where, you know, we can both say silly things. We're not going to judge each other, and really get to the essence of what needs to be discussed here. And where you can do that with one person within a business, it has a knock-on effect to the next person and the next person. And obviously, the more senior that person is, then the greater the influencer they can be. And I think this was a point Kike said at the beginning, that this is not just about a knee-jerk reaction to George Floyd. I sort of liken this phase we're in as a society as like everyone's been in the dark, the curtains have been ripped open, and there's that initial phase where you're a bit discoordinated and you don't know what's going on. But if people can just give themselves some time to sort of adjust their eyes and really look at the size of the challenges here, they stand a much better chance of putting in the necessary long-term changes to have the long-term gains, as opposed to the short-term knee-jerk fixes. It takes time. We've got to be patient, but you know, I've got the hope and the energy. And I'm looking at your video here. You seem to have the same hope and energy in your eyes as well. So stick with it, please.
Thanks.
We've got about 10 minutes. We might be able to go a bit over. I think there's about 7 questions still, but I think it'll be good first for the panel to address this question about if we were to come back in a year's time and everybody that was on this webinar is to be on this webinar again, what 3 things would you like to have seen they do, that individual do? Let's start with Simone.
I think having KPIs in place that match up with any other business critical objective, things that are being tracked, measured, reported on, and obviously resulting in more Black people being at all levels of organisations with a real focus on senior appointments. The ethnicity pay gap reporting, I think, is for definite, you know, waiting for the government to land it as a must do. Let's get ahead of it. We all know what it's going to say, so we might as well start confronting it and dealing with it head on ASAP. And I think the last thing is around culture and engagement surveys. We all do them to death. We all know how our employees feel. Do we know how specific groups of people feel within the organisation? If we want to understand what that lived experience is like for Black people within our business, then we need to be measuring that when they're able to say it anonymously, not just when it takes real bravery and courage to come to leadership teams and say Black Lives Matter.
Amazing, thank you. Ollie?
Well, mine is so similar to Simone's actually. I think, you know, like data reporting for me is an absolute must. I think giving organizations, you know, clear measures and accountability to hitting those targets, I think it is, you know, going to significantly help change the dial. I think as well, I know there's a bit of sensitivity around kind of data, ethnicity data, capturing it. And I do know, you know, organizations struggle with that sometimes. But even if you can't report on recruitment or progression or retention, you can look at other measures as well. So things like outreach, you know, how many schools do you go into and advocate for this? Who are your suppliers? You know, that's not sensitive data. Like, what's the breakdown of those suppliers that you're working with? How many are, you know, Black-owned businesses? So I think there's lots of kind of data points that you can look at, as well as the kind of the employees and the individuals. And I think as well, just having regular forums, you know, open door sessions. You know, we in Accenture years ago, we used to have lots and lots of closed door sessions, and there was never really, it, you know, created a great safe space for people to really be honest and talk about how they feel. But those actions kind of never really came out of that room and went to, you know, leadership, to the influencers in the organization. So I think open door sessions, and for this to be kind of a regular agenda item, it's not just a one-off, it's not just a moment in time, you know, this needs to be kind of built into the way that we operate as an organization.
Amazing, thank you. Dom?
Okay, I think I've got 2 do's and 1 don't. The first one I've kind of mentioned already, which is disrupt yourself. You know, this is my points to sort of 2 business leaders that want to try and initiate change. You know, disrupt yourself. And for me, education is the path that starts the journey. The one book that hasn't been mentioned so far today in regards to the Black experience is Black and British by David Olusoga. I wish I had that book when I was 10 years old. My children who are 10 years old have that book, and it's when you I mean, it's a whole nother session, but it's empowering to know that you belong. We didn't just turn up here one day. Our parents and grandparents came to this country as British citizens. And when I acquired a knowledge of that, it had a profound effect on my sense of being. And you know, I really want other people to have that same level of understanding about their place within this society. My second point is leaders shouldn't lean on the Black people within their business to set up these networks and initiate all the change. Just because you're Black and you happen to work for that business, it doesn't mean you have all the answers and you're necessarily the expert when it comes to the Black experience in the UK. I mean, quite often people forget that being Black is a catch-all for many different cultures and many different subgroups and subgenres. And this leads on to my third point, which is if you want to have a supplier of something within a business, you usually go to an expert, don't you, to get that service. For some reason, a lot of companies sort of lean on people internally as opposed to going out to the experts. So I would really recommend people speak to people like Simone. I have a really good friend and mentor called Frank Starling, who runs a company called varietypack.co, and their reason to be is to help companies create and sustain diversity and inclusion programs and strategies that are geared and tailored towards what's happening within that business. So, you know, those are my 3 points. I'd love people to go away and do those 3 things.
Great, and let's have Mira. And by the way, yes, this will be recorded and will be shared. So we'll email this to everyone. Mira? You're on mute.
So my 3 things for everyone on this call and beyond. The first one is, I echo the first point I made on this, which is like education. So read those books, watch those YouTube videos, understand like the history and the divide, because I promise you that will shock you into action. The second one is, I really hope that in a year's time, the conversation about race and specifically the word Black isn't awkward anymore in a corporate setting. It's such a taboo and it's so hard to get past that people get really awkward or they close up around it. The minute you do because that happens, as a person of color or as a Black person, you tend to shy away from your identity fully, and you're never really able to bring your authentic self into work because so much of your experience is centered around your race. So I really do hope that it just becomes a very open conversation in the workplace. Thirdly, I'd definitely say the KPIs, it's key. You know, we as BYP can't really go into an organization and really help if there's no targets in place. Why do you want to work with us? What are you trying to achieve? So once kind of, you know, that push for KPIs around diversity and ethnicity reporting happens, yeah, I think that would be a massive achievement. And then of course, if that, you know, work with BYP as well, like, you know, if you want to work with us, if you want to find out more, you can reach out to me directly. I put my email on the chat.
Great. And then Gary.
Yeah, I think it's similar. It's kind of less talk, more action. I mean, I think it's great to educate. I think it's much more important to actually do something and not just kind of read books. And then I think the second bit is targets. And then the third bit is diversify your boards, because power starts at the top and then trickles down.
I love it. I love it from Gary. Gary's just like, guys, no more talking. And this is what this, everything is like action, okay? That's the American in him. I think, you know what, we can extend for like maybe another 10 minutes as we do still have quite a few questions, but if you'd like to drop off, that's more than fine. What we'll also do in terms of follow-up email, it will be the recording of this. We'll also have a blog piece, again, summarizing this. And from our Friday event, how do we mobilize change? At the bottom of it, you can actually sign it. So it's kind of like a pledge, unofficial pledge of saying, you know, you as an individual will commit to these 5 things to ensuring that you can help move the dial within your organization. So look out for that. So you'll get about 3 different things in a follow-up email in the next few days. But as I said, if you'd like to drop off, because it's an hour and a half now, feel free to. But there are a few more questions. So if we can limit answers to about 1 minute, maybe 1 per person, that'd be really cool. Okay, cool. So can we get Hanita, please? Is Hanita there?
Sorry. My question was, so in our organisation, our senior leadership team released a message saying how abhorrent the things that happened to about the video of George Floyd, and saying that racism is bad. But when questioned in a town hall, they seemed to have, our CTO basically said, well, I don't think there's any need for action. So I was just wondering how you would speak to senior leadership if that's their attitude, that racism is bad, but we don't have to do anything about it.
I think that's a great question, and that's probably the crux of everything we're here to answer today. I think you need a huge dose of patience. I tend to find with senior people, if you challenge them in public and expose something they don't know, it never goes well. So where there's an opportunity to speak to people one-on-one, and like I referred to before, you know, really take the time to sort of explain the background behind all of this. I mean, the George Floyd video is horrific, it's terrible. But the video of Amy Cooper is also indicative of the same problem. What we're seeing with George Floyd is what happens when the weapon is used. What we saw with Amy Cooper was the weaponizing of the power structure. And what worries and scares me is how many other Amy Coopers are there out there who are not aware of their thoughts and their behavior. So, you know, there's again, it sort of comes down to challenging, you know, if this person is 50 years old, you're challenging, you know, a 50-year-old paradigm, which doesn't change in an afternoon. It takes time and energy, but you've just, you know, it's just got to be done. Otherwise we'll be back to square one.
Can we get a question from Anissa, please? If Anissa's still around.
Yeah, I'm still here, thanks. I think I asked a couple questions, but one of the key questions that I did ask was about when it's appropriate to have Black-only spaces and when it's important to have white people included in those conversations. From my experience, you know, we're only just launching a BAME network, and previously we've had D&I networks that are focused on gender diversity. But what we found is that only women were becoming involved in that conversation, and they became sort of seen as women's events, and it's a women's problem. And I would like to not have history repeat itself if we're also looking at our BAME network. And I wondered if anyone had any advice about that.
I can give an opinion. I don't know whether it's advice. I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, I found a lot of issue with using the term BAME. So I know it's something that we use, and you know, we've already talked about a number of times on this call. But actually, if I read something somewhere which I loved, which said, if the question is Black, the answer isn't BAME. So, and I think what's relevant with that is go to what is it you're actually trying to achieve? What's your real question here? If it's, how can we get Black people together so they can talk about what is culturally happening for them, what their experience is, what they are on the receiving end of, and feel really safe to do that? Ask them what kind of environment would encourage that kind of conversation. If it's, how do we raise Black feelings of how it is to work here into the consciousness of leaders and managers and, you know, the organization, it will be a different answer. But if you ask the people that you're talking about, they'll tell you what will create the safest environment for them.
Great. Can we get Tara, please?
Well, like Gary, I'm American, so perhaps a bit impatient, but I'm wondering if people have seen examples of actually consciously expanding leadership teams and or boards to create more diversity now instead of waiting for slots to open up.
Well, Mira, I think you'd be good at answering that. So like BBC?
Oh, right, yeah, so interestingly, so it was about November time when we were at the CBI conference, and there was a panel on diversity, and the CEO of BBC was on that panel. And Kike put her hand up and asked, you know, this whole conversation's been about gender, even though it's diversity. What are you doing about Black or ethnic representation on your boards? And there was a CEO of BBC actually dodged the question, and the CEO of Microsoft said we're doing some great stuff when it comes to ethnicity within our shop floor or diversity within our shop floor, and that was like absolutely shocking. I mean, I remember Kike tweeted it, and I wouldn't say it went viral, but you know, it got a bit of attention. And the next day, we actually got a message from the CEO of BBC who called us in, and we ended up having a conversation, a meeting with him. And what he proposed was a really interesting kind of solution, we're still unsure about. And it was actually like getting, people of, from different ethnic backgrounds who aren't necessarily yet senior enough to be a board level, to be unofficial board level board members, advising the people on the board. So they would have an unofficial board member position, so they could have a voice, and the very non-diverse current board would have someone, would have people that they wouldn't normally have to run ideas with. So that was one interesting example that I'm not sure has been taken into action yet, but I like the way that was thought through. They would probably be the future kind of board leaders moving forward.
Just to add to that, I think what was interesting about that is that they still got the same board right, so as in their, their voice mattered and it would count. But obviously there was the alternative argument of tokenism, and obviously if they're not really worthy of that role, why would you give them this kind of unofficial role? Why don't you just have actual, Black leaders on the board? I think that's a very short-term solution, as a kind of, tomorrow let's do that. That's not the long-term solution at all. And I think that it's something that can challenge the board more. But there are a lot of things to question, like, will they actually take it seriously if they're like, you're just here as a volunteer? And how would others within the workplace react to that as well? So we were kind of unsure about that, but it is something that was proposed, and something I guess others can also consider. And again, back to our Friday event, the topic of tokenism did come up. And actually people were kind of like, you know what, this whole tokenism stuff, we don't even care about that word in, because actually if we get in, then we can make the change that we want to make, even if people want to kind of label it tokenism. So I think that point's quite interesting, because that also leads to the whole quotas argument about, should there be quotas that are enforced? And then people saying that, oh, but then it'll be quite a tokenism thing and people won't feel comfortable in those spaces. But then maybe the alternative is that they just don't ever really make their boards diverse. So it's stuff for us to think about. But that is something that, Mira and I had heard from BBC Studios CEO.
Okay, just add to that, please.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Jump in. I'm not sure if everyone's aware of this, but there's a report called the Parker Review, which is supported by Ernst & Young, which looks at the ethnic diversity within boardrooms. And I'd really urge everyone to download it and have a look at it. And it's really sobering reading. BAME people, and that's the term they use, hold less than 7% of director positions in the FTSE 350. That's 178 of 2,625, and only 15 of them are CEOs. Only 38 of FTSE 350 companies have more than one director of colour. And the Parker Review, headed up by someone very senior, as well as Andrea Leadsom is involved in this review as well, have given the FTSE 100 firms until the end of 2021 to appoint at least one non-white board level director. And for the FTSE 250 firms, they've been given until 2024. So when you look at those targets in isolation, I mean, it's pretty sad. I mean, it's pretty terrible that that's where the benchmark is. But it shows you how we're at such a low base that even just getting to step one is having at least one person on your board, by 2024 that's the side of the problem. But I think the targets and the KPIs are necessary, because if you don't give someone something to focus on, then it's very easy for that objective just to disappear and get lost in the noise of a million other KPIs.
Great, thank you. A few more questions and then we can all go. Deanna, are you still here? Deanna? Okay, no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I think my question's kind of been covered a bit previously, but it was more just about kind of the actual implementation of all of these discussions and these points that we've been raising. So kind of if there were top two actual tangible measures to put in place for big businesses, big orgs, what would you suggest we start with, especially if there is quite a big problem in the institutions that we're in, that there is quite a small population of Black staff, especially at a junior level. So it's not necessarily that we can start with the whole getting them up to senior positions. What two top steps would you suggest that we start implementing?
You're on mute.
Maybe you guys can just say a quick 1, 2.
jump in again if I can't see everyone, so I don't want to talk over anyone. I think one thing which comes to mind to me is companies need to have clarity on who the next leaders within their business are, who identify as Black. If you don't know who, I mean, if you've got, a company of 1,000 people, you've got 200, or 50 people who are Black, you must know who are who's the top tier within that 50. And I think once you identify those people, you've got to have a plan in place to upskill them and make them the best possible candidates they can be as and when an opportunity comes up. That would be my one bit of advice in 2 parts for you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll give 2 really quick things. One, get the support of your legal team. Someone mentioned positive action before. Positive action is lawful in the UK. Positive discrimination is not. Your legal teams will get on your side and explain what the differences are if you don't know, but understand your options for attracting more Black people into your business. And the other one is your executive search, recruitment agencies. If you keep going to the same providers, you're going to keep getting the same talent. Be demanding of diverse slate shortlists, not just one candidate who is pretty unlikely to ever get the job, but a proper diverse shortlist, and get the mandate for that straight from the CEO, so that goes to every hiring manager in the business that says they want justification for why you didn't hire the people you didn't hire. Not telling you who you have to hire, but they want that justification.
Great. Anyone else want to jump in?
I think, sorry, just really, really quickly, I was just going to say analysis. So use any data points that you can to give you a really good kind of jumping off point. So, understand exactly who the people are in your organization, where they sit, but also look at things like the time at level as well, and the times that different groups take to get promoted. And I know a lot of that, will sit with your HR function, but really challenge them to use kind of any data that they have available, just so you have a really good kind of starting point.
All right, great. One last question, and I think that's that. Thank you to everyone that's still here, still about 90 people. Joel, are you still here?
Hi, yeah, I'm still here. Just a quick one. I know this is around the corporate arena. I'm a small business owner, around 30 to 40 employees. I want to drive positive change. And as Dom said earlier, I can't rely necessarily on the Black people to do that. If I want to make the change, I need to lead it as well. How can I make a safe space for people in my company to come and start the conversation and work out how we're going to move forward as a company, because we're always quite collaborative in everything we do, particularly aware that obviously I'm a white leader, and obviously people don't talk to leaders anyway. They don't tell me, what I want to know, and it can be difficult to get information for people. So I just wondered if anyone had any advice on that.
So I've worked for a ton of startups and small companies. So my first bit of advice, or first point I would make, is it's actually a really great place to start. Like, most organizations we work with are already like 10,000 people in and are now thinking about diversity as an afterthought. The fact that you're very early on your growth, or you will be hiring, being very conscious of these things now is going to make a hell of a difference when you grow your team out. Like with small companies, I know for a fact referrals are the biggest form of hiring. So your first 100 people will look exactly like your first 10 people, essentially. So be very conscious and aware of that, and start partnering. So when you are reaching out to recruiters, or when you are reaching out to places where to publish your roles, think of places that have a diverse pool of talent that you wouldn't normally go to, like Simone says. So I'll say that as a start. There's normally a rule of 3. So if you're I know for a fact that they say this with women, if you have 3 women in a room, the conversation, women tend to feel more comfortable having conversations that are relevant to their gender, because there's 2 other people like them in the room. The same goes for people of specific ethnicities or other strands of diversity. So when you start doing that within the organization, you'll see those kind of conversations opening up already, and just allowing people to have that space, asking those questions. When I was at a startup like 3 years ago, my CEO actually always joked around with me, and he was like, "You've reverse mentored me." We formed a friendship, and I spoke to him a lot about all these issues that I was quite passionate about, and he listened. And so I think it's more of that. Like, I think you're in a really good position because you have so many touch points with your employees because you are such a small organization. So be very mindful about where you're promoting your roles and how you're getting your people in, I would say.
Great, thank you. I just want to say thank you to all the panelists for, you know, taking time out to give such great advice to everyone. Already just been having some fantastic feedback. I've enjoyed it, you know, even I've taken loads of notes as well. So again, thank you. I think everyone that's, you know, on this meeting, some of you said yes or no to joining our newsletter. So we have the Black Experience educational newsletter. What we can do, we can send out the one we sent out on Tuesday to everyone. And that also talks about how some Black employees feel. So there's you know, a quote of the week that kind of says someone like, you know, I get invited to the socials and they're going to tell me I look like Will Smith. These are the things that actually happen to Black employees. So that newsletter is very, you know, authentic and just talking about our experiences and something to kind of help. And I think that might help, you know, you, Joelle, in terms of understanding that experience. And again, as I said, we'll send over a blog piece, you know, from this event. There'll be a recording. Also something for you guys to sign if you'd like to sign that kind of unofficial pledge. And we'll make sure all the links that Gary and Dom had will also be there. So give us a couple of days, we'll get that sent over to you guys. But yeah, no, thank you. Connect with BYP Network on, you know, LinkedIn, social media, Mira at bypnetwork.co.uk. I think if any of you guys, as the panelists, want to quickly shout out how people can get in touch with you, let's start with Simone. Get the antidote. How can people hear about your business?
LinkedIn's the best place to follow me at the moment. I'm not keen to talk about antidotes while we've got COVID going on. So I haven't fully launched the website yet, but LinkedIn.
Great. Gary, I think Gary just put his email address there, but where else can people find you?
LinkedIn is great.
LinkedIn. Okay. I think everybody's LinkedIn. Ollie, are you LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'll pop it in the thing.
Okay, great. So they'll all pop it in the chat for you guys to see. But and if you have any questions, anything, just email us in. We might even have this monthly, you know, have different panelists and different discussion points. We know again from the Friday BAME Networks event, that's what they want. So we'll see, and it might be something we host monthly. But yeah, thank you everyone, and hope you have a great week. Take care.
Thanks, Kike.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.